The water was red, not at the edges, in the middle, where the men were. I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. What you were told about Dunkirk, what they put in the newspapers, what Churchill said in Parliament, what your grandparents believed their whole lives, is not a lie exactly, but it is not the whole truth either. And the part they left out is the part I have been carrying since I was 23 years old, standing on a beach in France, watching the water turn red, and understanding that nobody back home was ever going to know what this actually looked like. My name is Thomas Aldridge, Tommy, from Salford, Manchester. My father worked in the mills. My mother made the best hot pot in Lancashire, and she would argue that point with God himself if given the opportunity. I was 22 years old when they put me on a ship to France in September 1939, and 23 years old when I stood on a beach at Dunkirk in the last days of May 1940. And saw something that the British government decided the British public was not ready to see. Before I tell you what I saw, I need to tell you about a man named Jimmy Pearce, because Jimmy is why I am telling this story now, instead of taking it with me when I go. What Jimmy said to me on that beach, I will get to that. But you need to understand what the beach actually looked like first. Because Jimmy said what he said in the middle of all of it, and understanding what he said requires understanding what was around us when he said it. They called it a miracle, the newspapers, the BBC, Churchill standing up in Parliament talking about the Dunkirk spirit, the little ships, the ordinary people of England sailing across the Channel to bring their boys home. And that part was true. The little ships were real. The courage was real. I have never once questioned the courage of the men who came to get us. What they did not tell you was what the beach looked like when we got there. We had been walking for 4 days. Retreating is the honest word, but we were not allowed to call it retreating, moving to the coast. That was the phrase. As if we had decided to go on a seaside holiday and the Germans were simply going the same direction. We moved to the coast through Belgium and northern France, and the roads were chaos, abandoned vehicles, dead horses, civilians trying to go the opposite direction with everything they owned on carts, and the Stukas coming in low whenever they felt like it, because there was nothing left to stop them. I want to stop here and describe a Stuka dive bomber to you in a way that the history books do not, because the Stukas had sirens. They fitted them with sirens so that when they dived, the sound came before them. This rising mechanical scream that started somewhere above and grew louder and louder until it filled everything, and your body made decisions your mind had not yet caught up with. You were on the ground before you consciously decided to be on the ground. Every time. For 4 days. Every time that sound started, your body went to the earth without asking your permission. By the time we reached the outskirts of Dunkirk, I had stopped flinching. Not because I was brave, because my body had used up whatever mechanism creates the flinch, and there was nothing left. I walked through the last mile to the coast in a kind of empty calm that I have never felt before or since, and hope I never feel again, because it is not a good feeling. It is the feeling of something running out. And then we came over a rise in the dunes, and I saw the beach. Now here is what the newspapers showed. Orderly lines of men standing in the water up to their chests, waiting patiently for the boats, maintaining discipline and dignity under pressure. The Dunkirk spirit, British stoicism. And that was there. I am not saying that was not there. I saw those lines. I stood in one of them. But here is what the newspapers did not show. The beach was enormous, miles of it. And across those miles were not just the orderly lines. There were men who had simply stopped. Men sitting in the sand staring at nothing. Men who had thrown away their rifles because they had decided they were not going to need them anymore in either direction. There were men who had walked into the water and kept walking, not toward the boats, just walking until the water took them. And there were the ones who had been hit by the Stukas on the beach itself, because the Stukas came to the beach too, the sirens, the dives, the bombs dropping among men who had nowhere to go, because the sea was in front of them and the Germans were behind them, and all they could do was lie flat on the sand and hope the mathematics worked in their favour. Sometimes the mathematics worked, and sometimes they did not. The water was red, not everywhere, in the areas closest to where the bombs had fallen and the boats had been trying to come in. Red in the way that water goes red when there are too many men in it, and some of them are no longer in one piece. I am going to say that plainly, because I have spent 80 years watching people soften this, and the softening is exactly the problem. The water was red. I saw it. 23 years old, standing on a beach in France, seeing something that my government had already decided the people of Britain were not strong enough to hear about. I need to tell you about Jimmy now. Jimmy Pearce was from Leeds, 24 years old. Bricklayer before the war. He had a laugh that you could hear from 50 yards away in a quiet room. And we had become friends in the particular way that soldiers become friends. Not because we chose each other, but because circumstance kept putting us next to each other. And eventually you stop noticing where one person ends and the other begins. Jimmy had been on the beach for 2 days before I arrived. He had been in one of the orderly lines in the water, chest deep, for hours, the tide coming in and going out, men around him being hit by shrapnel from the Stukas and going under, and the line closing up around the gap they left, because what else do you do? Jimmy had been in that water for 6 hours before a boat came close enough, and he had simply continued standing there. Because by hour 6, the water was what he knew, and the boat was something that belonged to a different world. When I found him, he was sitting in the sand above the waterline, not in the orderly line, just sitting, watching the water. I sat down next to him. He did not say anything for a long time. The Stukas came and we lay flat, and the bombs hit somewhere to our left, and we got back up. He still did not say anything. Then he said, "Tommy, are they going to tell people about this?" I said I did not know. He said, "Because I have been sitting here thinking about my mum reading the newspaper, about what she is going to think this looked like. And I do not think what she is going to think it looked like is what it looks like." I said, "No, it is not." He said, Someone should tell her. Someone should tell all of them what it actually looks like. I said I would. He looked at me for a moment, and then he nodded. And then a boat came close enough to the shore, and we both got into the water, and we waded out to it. I need to tell you what happened to Jimmy on that boat, because I have been holding that back since I mentioned his name, and I cannot hold it any longer. We got onto the boat, a small civilian vessel, a pleasure cruiser from some marina on the south coast of England, the kind of boat people take out on bank holidays. There were 40 men on it, who should have had perhaps 12. We were sitting on top of each other. The deck was at the waterline, and the Stukas found us. Jimmy was at the back of the boat. I was near the front. The bomb did not hit the boat directly. It hit the water about 10 meters away. The concussion from a near miss in the water is not like being bombed on land. The water transfers the force upward and outward, and the boat came up and came down, and when it came down, Jimmy was not on the back of the boat anymore. I looked for him in the water for a long time. The boat kept moving because stopping meant dying, and the man at the wheel made the right decision, and the right decision meant we did not stop. I have thought about that decision every day since May 1940. I got back to England, Dover, then a train, then a street in Manchester that looked exactly the same as it had looked when I left. And that sameness was the strangest thing, that the street had simply continued being itself, while all of that was happening somewhere else. My mother made hot pot the first night, same recipe, same kitchen. She asked me how it was. I told her it was the best hot pot in Lancashire. She never asked about France. I never told her. Churchill spoke in Parliament. He said we shall fight on the beaches. He said this was their finest hour. And the newspapers showed the orderly lines and the little ships and the Dunkirk spirit. And my mother read those newspapers at the kitchen table, and I sat across from her, and I did not say anything, because I had promised Jimmy I would tell people what it actually looked like, and I did not know how to start. I am starting now. It looked like men walking into the water and not stopping. It looked like the mathematics not working. It looked like a beach that was red in the places where the boats had been trying to come in. It looked like Jimmy at the back of a boat, and then not at the back of a boat. It was the finest hour of the men who came to get us. I believe that completely. It was also the worst thing I have ever seen. I believe that completely too. Churchill was right that we should not have shown people what the beach looked like. It would have broken something. I understand that decision now, even if I spent 60 years not understanding it. But Jimmy asked me to tell someone, so I am telling you.